excited to see so many people in the chat already active. Feel free to leave comments, say hi. I'm especially interested to know where you're joining from. How did you find out about this? I'm expecting people to join from various of different communities, different technologies, and that's what the Codebase is all about. The idea for the Codebase was actually born over a year ago. At the beginning of 2020, I was thinking about how I traveled a lot. I went to meetups, conferences, and I met a lot of amazing people. And I wanted to do like video podcasts with them. People doing different tech, different backgrounds, all from all over the globe. But then, like we all know, like the week after I got my gear, the world shut down, and it took me a year to kind of pivot this show into the Codebase that we're kicking off now. The idea with the Codebase is to showcase people from different communities. Some developers like to hang out only in the communities of their favorite technology, like JavaScript devs in JS communities and Python people in Python communities. And I'm one of those people who hangs out with everybody. So this show is all about those communities and the people in them. Like I mentioned, I'm Juhis. I will be your host today and in the future shows. I currently work as a developer advocate in a consulting company called Futuris here in beautiful Helsinki, Finland. And in this very first show, I'm super happy to have a good friend of mine, Fotis, join the show. Hey Fotis, how's it going?
Hi. Good. Can you hear me? Let me check the phrase of 2020.
Yes. So Fotis is not only a good friend of mine, but he's a software developer and an accessibility specialist, and also a colleague of mine. So over the past years past 3 years, we've been interacting a lot, and not to put too much pressure on him, but I've learned so much about web dev and accessibility and all that from Fotis. So it's super nice to have you. How are you doing?
Good. Excited to be here. Tiny bit nervous as well. But good. No, I'm. It's been a good few days, I think. Like at least it's been sunny.
Yeah, like one of the things when I was thinking earlier today, like what should we small talk about in the beginning, and like the thing I always talk with you is the weather, and like how the sunshine is arriving, and I think they made a prediction that this week will be the first official spring week here in Helsinki, Finland. And when I looked at the official definition of spring, I was a little bit kind of disappointed because it wasn't very ambitious. As long as it's over 0 for consecutive days, that's what they call spring. But I guess in Finland you have to take what you get.
Yeah, I mean that might also be summer, like in Finland. So you gotta specify what spring is, right?
Yeah, it's like spring and summer are those things in Finland that you need to look from the calendar rather than the temperature or the weather outside.
I saw a nice thing the other day that said, and I'm actually adopting it, which says that, okay, from tomorrow I'm going to start wearing a jacket and spring has got to keep up with me. It's a state of mind, maybe. No, it's not, but,
Yeah, I'm waiting for the day when I can go to the store without a jacket. That's my definition of spring.
Oh. No, for me, jacket weather is spring. Like, I think that's nice, actually. Maybe one of the nicer things about spring in Finland is that I get to wear a jacket because I like jackets.
Yeah, there's always something positive with the moderately cold weather. Awesome, but we're not here to only talk about weather, even though it's one of those things that brings happiness to life, especially these days. So you're a web developer, an accessibility specialist. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your background. Kind of, how did you end up building these things?
Yeah. How did I end up building these things? Oh, I don't know. I started doing it and then I kept doing it. No. So what can I tell you about me? Fotis. I live in Helsinki. That's something maybe. I work in Futurize. I'm from Greece. That's something I forget about sometimes. I work, yeah, mostly, well, any kind of software development, but front end is what I enjoy a lot because you get to put things that are out there for everybody to use. There's like it's messy many times, especially web development, because you have different browsers, different devices, operating systems. Um, but also, I think that's kind of the beauty of it, and that's what I like a lot about it. I think accessibility was a pretty direct line, I think, from that thinking for me at least, is that hey, here's like a bunch of ways you can make this website work for everyone, regardless of how they're interacting with the page. So whether they're interacting with the mouse or by touch, with a keyboard, with a screen reader, with a specific piece of assistive technology. Yeah, that's sort of the thing I enjoy doing. And also, I have to say that we tend, at least in development, to talk about, oh, let's speak abstractly and the details do not matter, and all of that is very nice and aspirational, but I think especially in web development and in accessibility, the details matter a lot. Like, and so, yeah, I don't know. I think it's a nice thing to work with. Like if you haven't dived in yet into the front end or accessibility, I think it's a lot of fun. Like there's a lot of interesting challenges to tackle there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think that it's really interesting because of its impact. That it's something that really matters in life. Like as developers, we sometimes work on things that are less impactful or less kind of meaningful to us. But accessibility is definitely one of those things that kind of focusing on it and making it better. It helps everybody, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think, like you said earlier about the kind of messiness of front end, one thing that comes to mind, especially with accessibility and kind of why the situation isn't always so good, is that the browsers are so lenient. They kind of allow you to do almost anything. And they don't kind of strictly like force us to write accessible things. And I think that like, especially when I've been learning like past 20 years on the like web development and HTML and JavaScript, like most of the content that I've used to learn hasn't been very accessibility focused. It's been kind of, well, it renders in the browser, so it must be good.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I would not identify the problem as being that the browser is lenient because, I mean, I think it's kind of cool that you can throw different things in HTML and it works, but I think it more speaks to the teaching or what we prioritize, right? Because if I, same thing, even if we think, for example, about work, right? Like uh, the thing that we define as done is, yeah, like the person in charge of like allocating the tasks looks at the thing and says, hey, this looks good, or it doesn't. And then there's a lot of stuff with accessibility that you don't see visually necessarily. And so, yeah, if it doesn't get prioritized, that's not what you're going to have in teaching. It's not what you're going to have, well, with people who pick it up. Like that's also been my experience working with people. It's not that necessarily people like wake up and say, I'm going to write an inaccessible site. But if you don't know about it, or if you don't know where to find resources, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, exactly. You've also been working with accessibility certificates at work lately. Can you talk a little bit about that world and kind of what kind of inspired you to start building that at the company?
Yeah, so certification is one of those things that, well, actually, I don't know. I haven't been in this industry too long, but people tell me that they tend to associate with like very corporate-y kind of processes, and I don't necessarily, again, have enough experience to speak to that. But what's interesting in accessibility, at least, is that there is this organization, the IAP, the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, that is trying to make some kind of curriculum and certification to say, hey, this person knows about accessibility. Now, there's a lot of discussion whether that is actually representative or what exactly how it covers, etc. I'm not really interested into going into that because, like, I myself have not I don't have strong feelings about that either way. I think it's good that there's some kind of common sense for it. But where it does matter a lot is, again, when you think about companies, right? And you want people to have the time and space, and concretely, that also means the money, the budget, when we talk about a company, to learn about accessibility. But it's really hard to convince people to put, even when companies say that they care about accessibility, what I often ask is like, okay, where's the money going? Because you can care all you want, but if you don't allocate the time and effort for people. And similarly, I think on behalf of the people learning, is that if I'm trying to learn something, I most likely want to do it while I'm working, while I'm getting paid to do it. Like I finish work, and something that a friend was telling me, hey, I finish work, I have like a family to take care of, I have like, people, friends I want to see, and so on. That you can't expect to externalize all of the learning on people's time. And so I thought that, yeah, having a certificate and being able to get people to study for that was a really good win-win situation for like employers and especially people who want to learn about. Because yeah, I've learned a lot about accessibility on my own time, and it's not something that I would necessarily wish on other people. It's yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess it gives a frame of where to start, what kind of things to focus on, even if the certificate itself isn't the kind of priority or the point. But having the curriculum, having things to focus, and then also having the learning materials, that's something that I haven't yet done the certificate, but it's something I've been thinking about, and I feel that it helps a lot when I don't have to start with Google and be like, hey, what is accessibility? But I can actually get some kind of guidance, get started with people who know more about that. Awesome. So a little bit about what we're gonna do today. We're gonna do some live coding. We're gonna pair up with Fotis. I will bring up the VS Code. Please let us know in the chat if it's too small. I can zoom in a little bit if that's helpful. And then every now and then we're gonna jump into the browser and look at what we built. And then jump back and forth between the code and between the output of the code. So if we think about forms, even before we write any code, what are some of the most common kind of pitfalls and things that people get wrong, or that have the biggest impact?
Yeah. So okay, let me let's start a little bit. Maybe I can give you a very brief introduction, like about maybe accessibility, before we talk about why forms matter in that sense. Is that so? Accessibility is about making sure that the site can be used broadly by everyone, but like in particular people with disabilities. And again, that goes into a lot of details about how like disabilities are thought of in modern days versus like in the 80s or something. But broadly speaking, when you're thinking about HTML, JavaScript, all of that interaction that happens in the browser, there are pieces of software or like hardware methods to interact with the page. So quite often people interact, for example, with a mouse and a keyboard, mostly with a mouse, just clicking around. Quite often people interact only with a keyboard. Maybe they have a repetitive stress injury in their wrists, and so they navigate only with the keyboard and they can activate everything and so on. And other times people might use more devices such as a screen reader, which again is often a common example that people give. A screen reader is a device, or well, no, it's a piece of software that will interact with the computer, broadly speaking, and it will be able to make sense of the semantics on the page. So it's not like reading the content of your screen, as in screen capture or anything like that. There is a structured way in which operating systems and browsers and so on expose that information. The nice thing, what I like a lot about HTML is that it has default mappings for screen readers to pick up, or for the operating systems to map to the screen reader. Which is to say that when you're browsing websites, there are some good facilities that let you know, for example, hey, you're on a page in YouTube, its title is Codebase episode 1. Here's a button that you can use to subscribe, and so on and so forth. And so when it comes to building websites and making things accessible, it's a lot about ensuring that that information is available commonly. Also, the final thing I will say on this is that people tend to think that this requires some really esoteric, special, hidden, technique. Sometimes it does. I'm not saying it doesn't always, but it's not bespoke. Like you don't implement the software that reads out the screen. That software exists. There's dedicated people working on it. What you have to do is ensure that the information is communicated correctly. And that ends up being pretty direct within the HTML. So we can go into forms now, and just so we have that context in a way.
Yeah.
So
if we think about forms as kind of HTML elements, and kind of especially from the kind of usability and accessibility perspective, what kind of things come to mind? What are the things that you see in the day-to-day that kind of annoys or frustrates you, and what are some of the things that like are the most common pitfalls that people get into?
So the first one would be, if you have an input, please have labels for that input. A label again for that input is commonly like the piece of text commonly over the input that describes what it's about. For example, email for a text input.
Maybe we can start with that, and let's do like a real life example of what that means.
Yes. Oh, well, if we're doing the real life example of HTML, the first thing you might want to do is put it in a form element. So that's form in HTML. Form, typically you will use it if you're using the default HTML handling of forms. We're not going to be doing that today because we have a demo, we don't have any server. But it's still good to put the form element there, even if you're handling the inputs yourself. For example, you're sending them via XHR as JSON. The reason you want to do it is, again, if you think about what information you're exposing to assistive technologies, you're saying that, hey, there is some kind of form in here. How exactly it gets exposed, don't worry about it. It's not up to you ultimately, but it's good to have it there.
Then, so is it good to use the form, even if it's not kind of what we normally think of as a form? Let's say that you have a search field at the top of YouTube.
Yeah,
would you wrap that around form?
So a search field is a very interesting thing because it's like a one field. But yes, and in fact, there is a, if I'm not wrong, I think there is a role search that you can add to it that declares that. It doesn't really do much in practice. So what this might do, for instance, if you put the attribute role equals search, if you notice on your mobile device, the enter key might change to a magnifying glass icon. Like screen readers could announce it as something with a role, but ultimately what's going to be announced is the input and it's the input's name. But yeah, I would say wrap it in a form. You don't have anything to lose by doing that.
And one thing I could mention at this point that I forgot to say at the beginning, feel free to ask questions in the chat. We will bring them up at some point and discuss those as well. So now you have a unique access to ask anything from Fotis.
And that's actually something I find interesting when I work with people on accessibility, is that 9 times out of 10 I forget something because it's hard to like remember what is obvious when what isn't. So actually this helps me a lot if you have questions. Yeah, so you have a form. And then suppose you have an input of type equals text, which is going to show a text input. Now, this by itself is not going to do much. I mean, if you can show the browser maybe.
Yeah.
So there is a rectangle vaguely with that you can type in, which is really cool. Now, again, the first thing you want to do is add a label to that form. Almost immediately, you should have some kind of label. Label refers both to the input, to the label element, but it also means have text basically that can show what the form is about. And let's just say that this is a, what did we say? Let's say, what is your favorite Pokemon? Is what I hear you like Pokemon, for example.
I definitely do. I'm super excited that we're doing some Pokemon stuff.
Nice. So this by itself is a label element. However, it's incomplete. What we need to do, in fact, is we need to say that this label element right here is a label for this input. There's multiple ways to do that. One of which is a more minimal way, which is to put the input inside of the label. If you want to show that in the preview, I can show you some really cool way that you can see if the label is correct. So we can do the styles later. By default, the labels and inputs are inline. But if you click not on the box, but on the label itself, on the text, you will notice that the box gets focused. And that's something that the browsers do as an affordance. So to give you a bigger target. So if you're browsing, for example, with touch, or maybe like whatever, for whatever reason, you might not have accurate like pointing, this actually is something that you get for free. And it's also a quick way to check if it has been associated correctly. There are ways to give a name to an input that does not have this behavior. We're not going to go into them today. But so while you can do this, I don't usually do this unless I'm making like a really quick demo. The reason is it's kind of a pain to style in my experience, and having them as separate elements is more flexible. So instead, what you can do is give this for attribute to the label, and then this for attribute has to be some kind of unique ID, because then the input itself is going to have an ID. So for example, let's call this Pokemon name or something like that. Fun fact, if you want to hear in production or in big sites, what ends up being the hardest problem in all of these things is actually having unique IDs, which I find really funny, but it's true, at least in my experience. So yeah, find good ways to have unique IDs. It's good. Anyway, so, and again, you have to match it. So you can say, this is a label for Pokemon name, and thus it labels this element. If you go again to the preview, it probably looks exactly the same as it did before. And you can verify that if you click on it, again, you get the focus, which is quite nice.
So one of the things I see every now and then is that like sites have the label inside the box.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that? Is that a different way? Is that the wrong way? What's the deal with that?
Yeah, so there's many... well, that's a Pandora's box. I'm happy that 20 minutes in, we have something tricky. So you might be seeing one of two things. Well, one of multiple things, infinitely things, actually. But let's say two. One of them might be, you might be seeing the placeholder. The second one is you might be seeing this style of input fields that are inspired by Google's material design, where they place the text inside of the field, and as soon as you start typing, the text moves up or animates up. Anyway, I don't think either of them is a good idea, but especially the former one. So I can show you the former one. The former one in code looks something like this. It looks placeholder, which is an attribute that exists in HTML.
Sorry.
No worries. So I don't know how to format it. Let's say this formatting is good. So you might have, for example, EG EV. Is that how you write EV? Is it two E's, two E's? Yes, okay. So if you go to the preview now, you will see that it says, where's your favorite Pokemon? EG EV. And then if you click on the field or you focus the field and you start typing, you notice that the placeholder will disappear. Sorry, that's great. So the placeholder, already that's a problem, right? Because if you have a form with many inputs that disappear as soon as you start typing, you forget where you are. The bigger problem, though, is that, again, if we think about what information you're exposing to assistive technologies, the label gives a name to the input. So that input by itself, for example, if I open a screen reader, it's going to tell me, hey, what is your favorite Pokemon? Text input empty. If I don't have the label and I only have the placeholder, I'm not going to have a unique name. I'm not going to have a name for this input. So basically, I would be hearing the equivalent of text input empty, text input empty. While screen readers might occasionally read even the HTML or try to figure out the placeholder as the name, don't rely on it. It's a bad idea for multiple reasons. Also, the placeholder text quite often has bad color contrast. It's like a very light gray. So the most that I would use the placeholder text for would be to give examples. But even that, maybe I would put in the text. For example, if I had a postcode, if I had like, 00200 or something. So if I say postcode, whatever, maybe I would put this here, but also I might inside of the label say of the form 00, 200 or something. Because again, you can't rely on the placeholder. Like it's good visually maybe as an extra cherry on the top, but even if you start going down the route of explaining the format to people, put that in the label. It's fine if the label is long.
Yeah, because so if it's only in the placeholder and I start typing, then I forget what it was, the format or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds
Right. Or
good.
if you make a mistake and it tells you, "Hey, this is an error," what was it? Exactly. Let me. Can I do some styling real quick? Because
Yes.
I can't look at the form anymore. So the first thing you want to do, as far as I'm concerned, in every style sheet is to give a border box sizing. This is just gonna make things work the way you would expect them to work. That's all I would say. And then maybe take the inputs and the label. Let's take a text area. These are all like, well, let's do these for now. These are all HTML form elements. You can do something like this, maybe. I don't know, because you want to be them like in the block flow, or I like them to be. And also, it turns out that the inputs don't inherit the font by default, I think. So you probably want to have similar styling. So if you go to the page now, at least the label should be before the thing. Excellent. Yes. Um, and then we can do some more things, maybe like label. And yes, I know that in actual production code, you might not want to be targeting things with the elements necessarily, though I would say display block and font inherit, I would. But anyway. And then let's do, I don't know, what do we call it? An input that's next to a label. I don't know. Give it some top margin, maybe of half RM, something like that.
All right, let's see what happens then. All right, it's already starting to look much better than the defaults that I had. And I do have to say that, like, in addition to accessibility and web development and like JavaScript stuff, I've also learned a lot about CSS from working in the same project with Fotis. It's been a nice perk of learning more.
The last thing I will do is I will add like a solid border, because that makes sense, right? 1, 1, 1. I like this, like just not quite 0, 0, 0, but like 1, 1, 1. And hopefully that's fine. Maybe this is a decent focus style. Then yeah, sometimes I even like add the padding to the input. I don't know why. Can I format? Oh yes. This VS Code thing is really nice. Like I have my usual workflow and I don't need to stress about anything.
Yeah, it's amazing how it's like both of us can have our own thing and work on the same. And one thing I'm especially impressed is that you can save the file and then it's saved on my computer. That's the magic of the internet.
I hadn't even thought about it.
I love software development. I didn't know that when we started, but that is something I learned recently.
Remember, actually, I think the first time I tried the VS Code Livestr, the thing that we're using to do the collaborative coding right now, I think it was the first time we tried it in October 2019 with you, actually.
Yeah, we were doing like, it was during the Oktoberfest event. We were building a selfie party web app.
Oh, yes. Now I remember.
Back then it was allowed to sit next to each other.
And share the code. Like, sit next to each other, and in order to collaborate, the data has to go to the US and come back to the same room. That's great. Okay, I think that's enough styling, at least for now, just because it was really bothering me. Tell me more things. What else should we do? Oh, well, there's more things we can do with this form, of course. For example, we can have a submit button.
Before we go to the button, one thing you mentioned slightly was focus styles. What is that all about?
Yes. Thank you. Great. If you go to the preview real quick, you might notice that if you let's say click on the element, or you use the tab key on your keyboard, there's a really faint like blue border around the black border of the input. This is called the focus style. So by default, the browsers will give focus styles to interactive elements, so inputs, buttons, selects, many things actually. It's a fun exercise if you want to list everything that's interactive in the browser. And that's good because, again, if you're browsing by keyboard, um, or for some reason you use the keyboard to end up on an element, you need to know where you are, right? So yeah, so that's sort of the idea. Um, I think web development is interesting because many people tend to browse with like tats or with the pointer device. But I know something we've spoken about often is if you think of video game consoles, um, I think those are sort of devices where you can't assume that people have a free floating pointer. In fact, for most of the time, you didn't have it. So, for example, I don't know, N64 or something like that, you or SNES even, you don't have like a free floating pointer, so you have to say that you go through every item on the menu in sequence. So you open up the menu and you have some arrow, you have some rectangle. So all of these are focus indicators that are quite interesting. What's the same is sometimes you see CSS that's emulating those like older consoles, and they don't have focus styles, and I find that pretty hilarious because like the consoles themselves had it. But anyway, that's the focus styles. The browser has them by default.
What are some of the consequences that if you don't use them, or if you kind of override the defaults by saying that let's not have focus styles, they don't match the design?
Yes.
What are the bad things that happen?
So if you go back to the code real quick, I can tell you how to remove them, and then I will tell you not to do this. Wait, oh yeah, I'm gonna put them higher up actually because like cascade and so on. So if you go to the top is where I'll put the declaration.
Yes.
So please don't do this. What you might see in many style sheets on the web, so if you go online and you inspect the code, or you even try to use the keyboard to move around, again with your tab key on the top left of your keyboard, you will see a declaration something like this. So it's again universal selector, pseudo state focus, state of focus. So basically, this is the state that a element is in when it has, again, focus. So in the case of inputs, you're typing on it, but in the case of buttons, you're like on it, basically waiting to activate it. And then people will do this, outline none, which outline is the property that gives the default browser styling to these inputs. Sometimes they might even say outline none important because it's really important to remove the focus styles. But also, if I'm going to be a little bit charitable about this, is quite often this ends up in your style sheet many years ago, or it ends up in a very general CSS reset. CSS resets are typically these style sheets that people include at the very start of their styles to make things more consistent across browsers. So things like this declaration, like make everything have box sizing and border box. That's a very good default. You probably want it all the time. Even things like this one, like display block or font inherit, maybe for text elements. But yeah, this focus thing is kind of a plague. So I would say don't do this unless you're
let's
gonna
take a look at what that actually looks like.
Yeah.
So like before we took it away, you can see this really tinted like blue outline. And if we refresh, and now that's gone. So it means that the only way I can see where I am is from the text cursor thingy, the blinking thing. I don't know what it's called. Text caret maybe.
The caret, yeah. Yes. So let me do something real quick. Just stay on the thing. I'll tell you when to refresh. I'm gonna add a submit button real quick. So yeah, you could say that on the text input specifically, you can see it, though I don't think anybody should reasonably claim that the caret is enough. But well, okay, I'm not gonna argue that actually. But if you refresh the page now, there should be a submit button, and then which will also have to style anyway. But again, if you press tab, you're on the button now, presumably.
Yeah. So what I'm doing
So I would say in general, unless you're gonna enhance the focus styles, don't remove them. Also, browsers can be pretty good these days. Like I think Chrome at least has really nice focus styles nowadays because what they do a really cool thing where you stack two borders. So they stack a white and a black border, so next to each other, so that regardless of the background that you have, it's decently visible, which is quite
Yeah, so
nice.
it always gives a little bit of room between the outline and the element itself.
Yeah, but not just the room. It's that it's like you have two outlines, a white one and a black one, so that regardless if you're on a black background, let's say, you're gonna see the white one, and vice versa, which I think is a good idea.
Cool.
Um,
So, this is the thing that we should never do.
yeah. Though I mean, you can enhance it if you want. So what I usually do inside Star Work on is we try to have it be consistent because sometimes the default browser focus styles are not very good. For example, I don't like Firefox's focus styles. Like I use the keyboard quite a lot, and it's a really subtle dotted line thing. But even then, thin ice. Like if you have time to test it, you should. Or well, no, you should take the time to test it. So you could do something like 2 pixel solid 111 or something. And here, actually, I might say, no, can I show you what I would actually do? In reality, I would do something like this. I would
Please
say,
do. Yes. Let's get real and see what actually happens in real life.
so this is something I do quite often when I contribute to projects that have removed focus styles and they might have different backgrounds, is I will set a default focus style and I will say outline. And here I'm going to use a CSS custom property. Let's call it FocusColor. As you can see, the correct definition of color, this thing that like American CSS does. And what this is going to do is that, like, depending on CSS custom properties, they cascade. So you, or, I don't know. Anyway, so they will change basically per subtree if you change them, which is quite nice because if I'm suddenly on a dark background, I can change the color. Yeah, it's manual, of course, but it's still better than nothing. And I'm going to give it a fallback of like this black color. And then in another comment, I will say, use black as the default. Most of the type is white. Generally, I think if you read the CSS I write, it's mostly comments because I'm just, I don't know. Even myself, if I read the code in a month, I want to know what I was thinking. And then it's a good idea if you're defining custom properties to also define them at the top. In fact, I'm going to just copy this comment here and format it. This root selector is the equivalent of saying HTML mostly, so I use that. And I'm gonna do one more thing because I know we're mostly dealing with things that already have a border. I'm gonna set an outline offset, which basically means set it a bit away from where the border would be. Let's say 1 pixel. And now if you go to the preview, hopefully it works. I also stealth added some space to the button. Yes, there we go.
Oh, that looks beautiful. Now it's much easier to see when I'm gonna submit the form and I can avoid sending things that I'm just testing out.
And like I can show you real quick what would happen on a dark background. So if you go to the HTML real quick, if we style this form to be like for like dark mode or something.
Oh, now we're getting fancy.
Oh no, we're not going to talk about dark mode, but like let's imagine that this is what this does. And then I do form dark mode. I don't know, something like that. I'm also gonna add some padding to the form just to have a nicer background. So now if you go to the preview, the thing is gonna be black. Well, also, okay. Well, the text is also that. But anyway, the focus style is not there, right? Or it's there, but you can't see it.
Yeah, it's
So
black, basically.
if you go back to the CSS now, we can add a comment that says, you know, and focus. So the background color is this off this off black, and then the color, which is the foreground or the font color, is just color in CSS. Again, we're going to use an off white or off gray, I guess. And this is the beauty of custom properties is, what did I call it? Hold on. Did I call it FocusColor or color focus? FocusColor, yeah. Is going to be, again, this thing that has good contrast, because we know that our font has good contrast, so we can do the same thing here. What I could have done instead, you can show this working, and I'll show you a different way of doing this. So again, it works, which is nice. Now, if you...
So is the black that we see kind of in the middle, that's caused by the offset, right?
Yes, yeah, it's the border and then the offset and then the white, exactly.
Yeah.
So I can show you one more way of doing this, which I think is more fun, is that in this outline declaration, I could instead, wait, is that going to work? Let me think. What you can do is set CurrentColor as the default, and then you're going to omit the default here. And the reason this will work is the following. You're going to say that usually what do you call it? The foreground color has good contrast. So CurrentColor is a keyword in CSS in this case, or a color keyword. I don't know the terminology. That basically says whatever the foreground color is. You might notice that it has this camel case thing. It's because it actually comes from the SVG specification, which uses camel case. So that's why it's, I think lowercase might also work, but I'm not gonna risk it. Because it usually has good color contrast, the focus color is only an override. We have not declared it in our root. And in fact, if I go here in the bottom, and I
need to cut you again. The only downside of this live share thing on VS Code is that it doesn't follow you, which kind of makes sense when you like to pair program and both write the code at the same time. But for the presentation, it adds a little bit of. Luckily, there's the purple color on the right. Gives me an easy way to find it. You probably don't see it in your own VS Code, but it shows me where you are. But yeah, anyway, go.
So yeah, if I remove this focus color like custom like property here and I save it, if you go to the thing, I believe it will work. By the way, we've had like good luck with just guessing. Now our luck has run out. What did I forget? Hold on a second.
So what's the idea that because we use the CurrentColor, it would use the like foreground color that we set?
Exactly. Can you try refreshing now? Maybe it's under lowercase. Well, see, I knew we would be cursed. But anyway,
yeah, this is the life of doing live demos and live coding.
You could elect to do this, and it would actually be better because then you don't even have to go guessing. Then you really only override the focus color. I can think of one example where you want to override the focus color. If I was, for example, on a black background and I had like a button with a white border, then they would stack. But we have the offset, so maybe that's fine. So again, if you start going into the weeds about the outlines, it's actually quite fun. But you really, because it's not even writing these for the things you have in front of you now, you have to anticipate what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think the manual override is good, but also we don't want our dark mode for the form, so I'm going to remove it also in the HTML, and it should be good to go now. Just the regular black focus outlines. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Sounds good.
So now we talked a little bit about labels and fields and focus styles. What else important is there when it comes to forms?
What I love about this is it's literally like one field with a submit button, but we have a bunch of stuff to think about. So
Yeah.
What else?
One of the things that comes to my mind that I've done every now and then is like sometimes it feels that kind of customizing little bit challenging. And then you sometimes need to make them look good. And then you make like a custom element that is working as a label for something below. So is there something there that we can kind of at least talk and maybe demo?
Yeah. So I'm gonna show you one thing real quick, and then we can go into that I just remembered. Buttons are really fun inside of a form. So if you're inside of a form, you get a lot of HTML stuff by default. One of the things you get is that if you put a button and you interact with that button, it's gonna submit the form, even if that button was like, for example, imagine you had a password field and you said like "so password." Which is why quite often people end up specifying that a button is of a type button, which looks really silly. For example, "so password." Because if you have a button of type password inside a default HTML form, it's not going to do the default submit action on it. So yeah, if you've looked at code and you've seen like button type button and it looks silly, it's because if that button ends up in a form ever, and that happens often in component libraries, you want to be intentional about it. The opposite of that, by the way, is type submit.
So if you do type button, then you don't have to do that like event.prevent default magic in JavaScript.
Yes, but it's not just that you have. Well, I think you should prevent the default for other reasons, but yes. But also, I think it gives you one extra. I'm trying to remember. I'm sure there's something else this changes, but yes, broadly speaking. Also, in addition to all of that, there is input type submit, which is a button. But I usually use a button type submit, again, because buttons tend to be shared components in the code bases I work at. So yeah.
So if you use the input like type submit, what will that be to like assistive technologies? Will it be announced as a button?
Most likely, yes. We can actually check it in the browser if you want. Hold on. Let me put type equals submit. And then let me remove this just for extra fun. If you go to the browser, you can actually check it with the browser DevTools. So
which one of these was the new one?
So the first one is the new one. It's because it doesn't have the button. Yeah. Yes. Sorry, on Chrome, I guess?
Yes.
Okay, so now go to the pane that says styles, and then on the arrow, so on the extra, that's usually where. No. Right to the right of
this one. Yes.
Yeah. And then the last option, it's like you're hiding it in the drawer somewhere. In the same way that HTML has a tree that you can use and read, and CSS has an object model as well. Accessibility also, the properties there. Accessibility is such a bad overloaded word in this case. The accessibility, but that's hold on. A representation of the document exists that will be represented to assistive technologies, and that often has only things that are interesting. So yeah, so if you go to the first button, you see that it says button, first of all.
Yeah.
And you can even, if you scroll to the bottom where it says computed properties, and you scroll there, yeah, it says role button. So again, that's what assistive technologies will get. Now, if you inspect the other button, it should also say content button. It's the same thing. So it's a button with also text. So they're, again, like you say, exposed in the same way, basically. Because, technically, screen readers don't read the HTML, though sometimes they do, in parentheses. They get this representation that the browser does that gives to the operating system that ends up at them. So it's there's a fantastic article that I said every time. It's called From Browsers to Screen Readers by Melanie Richards on Event Apart, I want to say. That we can share afterwards. But yeah, it's fantastic. It goes into all of the details of the operating systems and the browsers and all of that. Anyway, so that's the thing with the buttons.
After the talk or the live stream.
So let's talk about checkboxes now. So a checkbox is of an input of type equals checkbox. That says, for example, I confirm that this is indeed my favorite Pokemon. Or, more likely, sell my data and my soul. Soul. Anyway, but yeah, to say, I confirm that this is indeed my favorite Pokemon. Again, same thing. This is still an input, right? So what you want to do is you want a label for it. Very often, input checkboxes end up being wrapped in the label. I'm gonna put the label next to it. Again, you can do more cool styling things with that manner. We're gonna find out the ID in a bit, and then we're gonna take that. Oh yeah, the thing I just told you was wrong, by the way.
I was gonna ask about what does that do, because I've never seen content
Nothing.
inside checkbox, but
Yeah, I think my brain thought that, okay, this is wrapped in a label, but no, it does nothing. You're right. Again, we're gonna need an ID of, let's say, confirm, on confirm, and if you inspect the thing now, there should be a checkbox.
yes.
And yes, cool. So
And
we have
the
the
label
focus
is
icon.
correct, so I can click on the text and it will check it, and I can also.
So
It's accessible right now. But what if we want to make it like one of my favorites? It's more maybe on the like super designy side. Is it like some people have made like a Totoro toggle where the Totoro rolls over? We're not gonna do that today, but like you see those kind of like really customized that don't look like checkboxes.
I can show you the general technique for doing that and then refer you to like more in-depth writing. So if you go to the CSS real quick, we're gonna need a couple of things. First of all, I'm gonna fix a thing I did. I made everything a block, but really what I wanted to do is input type text should be a block. I want the checkboxes to be in line. Actually, I'm gonna hide the checkbox in a bit, but it's fine. Again, this is the attribute selector in like CSS. Let me think. I'm gonna do one more thing in the HTML. I am going to wrap this in a div of a class, let's say custom select. There's other ways of having a custom select with, for example, JavaScript and a bunch of like magic properties that I alluded to earlier. But I like this more because you keep the default HTML for not just screen readers, but broadly speaking, like reader mode, for instance, might read the HTML and not understand custom implementations and so on. So I'm going to wrap them in a div as a styling hook, mostly because we're going to do something. Now, what else can we do? Then we're going to go to the bottom of this thing. Custom checkboxes. No, custom select. Why did I call it select? I'm going to rename it. Don't worry. Custom checkbox. Okay. So now in custom checkbox, you want to do, broadly speaking, two things. You want to hide visually only the checkbox and replace it by your custom thing. It might be like an SVG, CSS box, an image, whatever it is. You're basically hiding it only visually and putting something else in its place. And when I say hiding it only visually, this is like a hyper-specific thing that if you put... oh, wait, there's a good question in the chat. I just noticed that. What's the difference between input ID, this thing, label for this thing, and putting the thing inside of the label? Yeah, you're right, Dusan, that there is no difference for screen readers. Both of them will result in an input that has the name of the label. So input text, this thing, and input text, this thing. In fact, putting the input inside the label is often very convenient because you don't have to deal with IDs. But putting them separately tends to be a bit nicer for styling in my experience. But yeah, you're right that functionally they end up being the same. Yeah, and sometimes you want, for example, if you put things inside of the label, suddenly you have to be a bit careful not to put any buttons in there, because if you put buttons, they will activate the label too because of reasons. But anyway, for screen readers, you're right. There's no difference. Like presumably both of them are going to be announced the same way. So if I were to do display none for the custom checkbox, I actually hold on, input type checkbox. If I were to do this, it would be hidden visually, so you're not going to see the input.
So if we jump into the screen, we can only see the label.
Yes. Now, the problem with that, however, is that it's also going to be removed for screen readers, which makes sense, right? Is if it's, not visible at all, if I've explicitly said this does not exist in the tree, why would, screen reader users hear about it?
If it's display none, it's removed from the DOM, right?
It's still in the DOM, but it's removed from the accessibility tree. Yes, in the same way that visually it's removed. This also goes for visibility hidden, like all of these basically. And again, 9 times out of 10, that's what you want to happen. For example, if you have a menu that only opens and closes, only appears and disappears, you don't want people to be stuck in an invisible menu somewhere off screen, which, by the way, often happens because if you want to animate that menu, you actually keep it displayed but hidden and you animate it in. Anyway, pain. So in reality, what you want to do is, first of all, you want to separate the input and the label because, again, this allows you to activate the checkbox by only interacting with the label, which is good. Then what you want to do is you want to hide this in a specific way. This is commonly called visually hidden in sort of accessibility circles, and it's a set of declarations, of which there are many, by the way, to only hide something visually but keep it available in the tree. So, for example, I'm going to cheat real quick and Google for it because I don't remember it off the top of my head. Come on, let's be real. So it could be something, quaint like this. So clip the path, make it, hide, don't make it mess with overflows, position it absolutely, etc. Anyway, that's one way to do it. And again, here you usually have this as a class, like visually hidden or something. And you might see it often if you're making surgical additions to the tree. And here you might leave a comment like hide it only visually, but not programmatically. Programmatically is what you might often refer to say, what gets exposed to screen readers. Then what you want to do is you want to style the label. Now, if you have the div as a styling hook, you don't need to do any fancy things. But something that people often do is this thing. So let me think if this works. Well, one true way to debug things, color red. Let's see if that works in the preview. Yep. Yes. Okay. So this selector I wrote with a tilde basically means that, if there is an element whose sibling higher up, immediate sibling, ? General sibling. Anyway, this is the general sibling combinator. If this thing has a thing to the left, you can style that. Which is quite nice. Now, again, you might see this quite often in solutions where you don't use any divs to style, but in this case, we have the div to style things with, so I'm actually going to be less fancy and say just style the label. And here is where you get to be creative and start painting a little bit your bespoke box. So one thing you might do is you might use a pseudo element. So you might do something like custom checkbox label before, which again gives a pseudo element that you have to give the content to. You can also make a display block. And then, because it is display block, it's going to show up in the regular flow. We're going to see about that in a second. We can also imagine some like width and height, because it's just a box at the moment. So let's say width 1 rem, and then height 1 rem, padding, I don't know, some padding might be nice. I use rems for these mostly because that's what I'm used to doing, but you could use pixels if you wanted to, and that's fine. And then you can give it a border. So let's say 1 pixel solid, and then our bespoke black color. I have absolutely no confidence that this works, but if we look at the preview, we'll find out.
Yeah, let's give it a go. What should we see after
like
this?
a rectangle, like a medium-ish rectangle. Yes, fuck yeah. Okay. Which is going to do nothing at the moment. Now, if we go to the CSS, I forgot that we actually do need our tilde operator, because we're going to do something really fancy. So we're going to say that if I have a custom checkbox, and inside of that, I have an input type of checkbox, which is checked. And I have a label next to that, which, yeah, I know. Again, you could skip the extra div if you had a class on the input itself, but I like the extra div for spacing for many, many reasons. So this little monstrosity here basically says that if you have a custom checkbox, inside of that you have the actual checkbox itself with the checked attribute. The checked attribute again gets toggled by the browser when you change its value. So it reflects the state basically that it's in. And then you have the label. Now we have enough information without, again, doing any JavaScript at all, only with CSS and HTML to display a check mark on the thing. Now, I don't know how to display a check mark because like you need like some background image SVG bullshit that I'm not like, I don't know at all. But actually, we already have our element, our box. So maybe we can give it a background color. I would say don't just give it a background color. It's good to have a checkbox because you're not only relying on color at that point, but for the purposes of demonstrating, let's just give it a, wait, say 456. That's like a mid gray or something, yes. And now I think it's gonna work. Why did I make this like a red? Anyway, it doesn't work, is it?
No, nothing's happening.
Wow. Let me think. What am I forgetting? What am I forgetting? Can you inspect the HTML real quick?
Absolutely. Let's see.
Yes. Try clicking on the label. I want to see the input get checked. I mean, on the label in the preview of the thing. God damn it! Why?
Yeah. So when we click this, it should, because it's a label for the confirm ID, it should be picking it up.
Now I'm feeling like I'm missing something. Wait, let me remove some of the magic. You can stay in the preview. I'm just toggling the things that we already have. So if you refresh now, try clicking now. Aha. Oh, but it doesn't get reflected. Wait, does it no longer get reflected? What am I forgetting?
So which item is this now? Yeah, it is this, but it doesn't get.
It doesn't change. Wait, no, but I think browsers might do that nowadays. But it still changes. You just don't see it. Let me refresh. Can you refresh just to hide the checkbox? Because I'm thinking. And now, if you edit the label, the input type checkbox.
This one?
Yes. And then you right click and then add an attribute to it and say checked. Just because I want to see, is it my CSS that's broken? Yes. Huh. Wait, what?
Like, shouldn't it be on this one?
Yeah.
The input.
Oh, on the input, yes. Did I tell you to put it on the label? Whoopsie. Yeah, so my CSS is not broken. I knew it. but I'm forgetting something that is probably incredibly obvious, but I can't think of right now.
If somebody in chat spots that, please help us out.
No, I mean,
It's one of those things where it's like it's something really small that you just keep missing.
yeah.
I've
But
had
anyway,
so many of those in my life.
if you want the basic principle for how to do custom checkboxes anyway, or custom radio buttons, this is the idea: that you have the thing, you hide it only visually, and then with pseudo elements, with SVG, with any way they're explicitly associated, you go and you style it. Let me double check. Yeah, I don't know what I got wrong, but anyway, it's fine. So there is a really good article, well, many good articles by Scott O'Hara, like an accessibility expert, that basically dives into a lot of these custom checkboxes. And there's an equally good one by Adrian Roselli that also goes into custom checkboxes.
And we will do some kind of a Twitter thread of all of these things that we've talked about, so that after the stream you can go there and check out what kind of things we couldn't fit into, like the first episode of Codebase.
Oh, wait, I might. Wait. I'm trying to think. Okay, let me. Hold on. Is it no longer? Is it like this? Can you try this now? Just on the off chance that it's a state. Ah, okay, yeah, it works.
Yeah, so it's not an attribute, but a state selector.
It is an attribute, but I think the browsers don't reflect it, basically. Like, or it's a property at least. Anyway, whatever. Okay, that's what I was forgetting. There we go. Yeah, and you can do other things, like, for example.
But in this kind of case now, how would I implement it to be like tappable? Or maybe it is, but focus styles is something that I'm missing.
This is good. Yeah. So if you had a default, and that again goes back to the idea that if you're overriding like browser defaults, there is a lot of responsibility on you. So you're right. I forgot that, hey, this probably needs a focus style. So what you want to do is, and again, that's the good part about having, actually, you can only do this if the checkbox is right before the label, because you can use the general sibling combinator. So if I go and copy my monstrosity, you'll see that in the same way that I'm checking the checked state, I'm going to go and say the focus state. So if the input gets focused, I need to send the focus somewhere else now. I'm sort of delegating the focus, if that makes sense. In this case, I'm just going to go and copy the thing I have already. Again, that's something I like a lot about custom properties, by the way, is that it doesn't matter on what element or how the focus color is used. As long as I use FocusColor, it's the correct. So even if I had the dark mode thing I showed you, it would work. I'm reasonably confident this will work.
So is the idea with this that when the checkbox is focused, it applies that to the label that comes after it?
Yeah, so if there is a label that has an input type checkbox before it that gets the focus, I can target the thing inside of it. Yeah.
All right, let's see how that works.
I sneakily changed the thing to be an inline block because it was bothering me.
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
That is beautiful.
Again, this should be a check mark for all intents and purposes. Don't rely only on color. I'm also going to do one more thing while at it. You don't have to change to the CSS. I'm going to give this some margin because it's bothering me. So if you refresh, there should be some good. Yes, okay. There we go. And you can play around with vertical alignment, blah, blah, blah. It's fine. I'm going to do one more thing, actually, because it is bothering me. I'm going to change this to be just like sans serif in the CSS, because
much more beautiful,
more professional. Yeah, more or less this. I think that's how you could do custom checkboxes and ready, or how I would recommend it. There's other ways you can do it, but I think you didn't have to write a single line of JavaScript. So this stays the same even if you're doing HTML form submissions. Now, granted, probably you're not doing it, but still, I think it's good.
So let's do a little bit of recap of this one. What did we actually do? Let's start from the HTML side, maybe.
I'll have some chocolate.
So we have an input field, which is our actual checkbox, right? And then we have a label that is kind of functioning as a pseudo kind of checkbox for us. Then we hide. No, where was the hiding? Here. So we hide visually, but not programmably, the actual checkbox. We make it small and we put it somewhere in the side. And then we had a label, or we had like a pseudo element before the label. And then once we click the label, it will trigger the checkbox to be, kind of hit an actual checkbox to be checked. And if that's the case, we change the background color. Did I get it correct?
Yeah, full marks, exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. One thing, this does have a downside, by the way. And again, this is where we're getting into like the weeds for accessibility, is that on mobile devices, there is a specific screen reader navigation mode where you hover over elements, and as you hover over them, as in like serially touch the screen, you hear out what's happening there. In those cases, if you hide the input and it's like 1 pixel wide, you are reducing the area in which somebody will find it. Now, they might find it when they run into the label. So it's like, but it is something that is happening there that I should point out. I don't know if it's how much of a problem it is. Like, this is, again, if you're going through the effort of styling something in a custom way, there is a lot that goes into it. It's not just, do the visuals. Like, or it shouldn't be just do the visuals. I understand, of course, it's, yeah, like we said earlier, right? If the PO is breathing down your neck and saying, "Hey, this looks done. Why are you taking one more day to do this?" That's, it's not done until it's accessible.
Yeah. Is there something else, some kind of different component or part of the components that you want to bring up? What is something that we could still talk about?
I don't know. Well, okay, there's one thing I can show you real quick, which is imagine one more nice thing in forms. If you have a group of related things, so for example, if we have a form that is about the Pokemon name, let's say, and then there are another set of inputs that are, let's say, Pokemon, favorite Pokemon series or something. And presumably, imagine more fields here. Grouping related fields is quite nice in HTML, and again, does something for screen readers. And that's by using the field set and legend elements. So if I do a field set here, I'm going to wrap presumably the related complete fake example that we have, but this is fine. And again, you only really are going to do this if you have multiple related things. So we have a field set that, again, defines semantically a set of related fields. That's why it's called a field set. By the way, a field set, you can use it even if you don't have input radios and checkboxes. Quite often people use field set for grouping radio buttons because that's one way you can give a common name to a selection of radios. We're not going to show that now, but you can actually use it to group different things together. But you also need the legend, what do you call this, element? Oh, damn it. Lag. Okay, so
the computer is trying to be too helpful.
Yeah. So basically, what this is going to say is that this set of fields is a group which is how it will be identified to assistive technologies. There we go, with Pokemon name. Now, if I was talking about actual usability here and in a production side, I would be less eager to do field set and legend, and I would be more eager to split these into separate forms on different pages. But again, that's much more into the what's a good idea usability wise and so on. So if you do field set and legend also has default styling, which I don't like, although I think it's kind of cool. It looks like a form.
Yeah, it looks like one of those legal pads where you have like a doctor's notebook.
Can I tell you something funny about the HTML specification, by the way?
Absolutely.
Well, I don't know if it's the HTML specification or the CSS one specifically. Is the way this styling works that you have the legend be on top of the lines. There is work, or there has been work done in the past year to specify that, because when this stuff has been around for probably decades, but you can only really do this cleanly, let's say, or in a way that is explainable in userland CSS, if that makes sense. The CSS that a user might be able to write. A user, I mean the developer. And it's only like in the past year that people have started to specify how exactly that works, which it's great. Like I said, I love the messiness of the web. Like the fact that this thing should keep running for 20, 30, 50 years is pretty good. But anyway, you can remove the styling of this with... well, actually, I don't remember how. What do you call it? No. Appearance. Can you check now real quick? Yeah. Let me try some more things. Oh yeah, by the way, appearance is not... fuck. Appearance is not actually available unprefixed. It needs to be WebKit appearance for other various compatibility reasons. You refresh now? God damn it. I'll have to remember it some other day. It might be a... No, actually, you know what? Maybe this is not it. Maybe legend is display block. Let's try that now. Okay. We're not gonna do this now. It is okay. But anyway, if you want to group things, I would recommend you put a field set and legend in your HTML. I think it's very good. In addition to doing that, and that's the final thing I'll tell you on this form that somehow is really simple and yet has a bunch of stuff into it. If you put a legend, I would recommend that you put a heading inside of it. The reason you might want to put a heading is screen readers can navigate, and screen reader users can navigate by headings. So you have shortcuts that you can jump to headings on a page, which is so more ergonomic than serially trying to go through the page. So because you can consider that something in a legend is worthwhile having in the hierarchy of the page, so I'm putting a heading level 2 here. Again, this might change the styling. Probably field set legends are styled like a heading in my experience, so you might as well go ahead and do that. I'm gonna remove this now from the HTML, mostly because we only have one set of fields, and I don't want to be lying to people. But I'm gonna keep the heading level 2 actually, because I think still it's good if your forms start with a heading. So let's say your favorite Pokemon. Should I capitalize it? Is our lawyers gonna come after me? Do I need the accent on the... There's an accent, right? On the E or the O?
Yeah, I think that the capitalization is gonna be the least of our problems if the Nintendo lawyers come to us.
Let me just check that I have it correct. Okay, now it should be consistent. Can you refresh the page? Game Freak, Nintendo, please don't sue me. There we go. Okay. Yeah. I think more or less that's more than enough that I could talk about on a forum for an hour.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's hide all the code and start wrapping up. If there's some people watching this live now or later and they're interested in accessibility, we've mentioned a couple of things, but what would be your recommendation? Where to start?
Let me eat and I'll tell you.
Sure. And while Fotis is eating, follow us on Twitter. I'm at Fotis is Fotis. Fotis posts about cool stuff and the beauty of the world and accessibility. I mostly talk about fun stuff and well, what Fotis does is also fun, but I post memes and stuff. And my Twitter is also the best way to find out when this thing is continuing. Another way to do that is to hit the subscribe button here on YouTube. I've always wanted to say that.
I was thinking that.
Now I feel like a real life YouTuber.
One recommendation I would have is the Ali project, the A11Y project.com. It's a community project for accessibility. A11Y, pronounced Ali, stands for accessibility. That's because you have A and then 11 letters in between and then Y. People typically use that because it's easier to like search Twitter, for example, or Google for, because accessibility is much more encompassing than just web accessibility and so on. In fact, I think web accessibility is still catching up to like much of the accessibility laws and regulations in the built environment, and especially in the EU. But the Ali project is good because they have a lot of very well-written articles that are short and to the point, and they have good links. There's much more that I could give you, but yeah, if you find me online, I'll be happy to talk about accessibility, as you can notice. So,
awesome. Thank you so much, Fotis, for joining the very first Codebase episode. I'm so happy I got to spend the 90 minutes with you, talk about the stuff that we talk about daily at work. So other people got to participate in that as well. And huge thanks to everybody who joined the stream. A lot of familiar names in the chat. For the next episode, it's gonna happen next month. I don't yet know when, and I'm not yet sure who is gonna be there. I'm hoping we get to talk about closure and do some backend stuff, but I haven't asked my guest yet, so I cannot make any promises there. I hope you all have a really great week. We will, like I said, we will make some kind of a Twitter thread on either one's Twitter and then retweet that for more materials, stuff to get started with. Any last words for this?
thank you for joining. That's all. Yeah.
Awesome. Everybody stay safe. Have fun. Get into accessibility and let's all build